if you read simply the first 3 verses, and here's the first 3, it says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him." Now I can literally talk about these 3 verses for days on end, because there is so much packed into these 3 verses. But let me give you a couple of things that should really grab your attention. This is why I say this is one of the most bizarre chapters in the entire Bible. Number one, we are told it's in the days of Herod the king. Now we know what happens later in the chapter, that Herod endeavors to murder all the male children in and around Jerusalem to prevent this baby, which is not a baby anymore. He's a young child. He's about 15 months old at this point in time. And that's why Herod has a margin of error of about 2 years, is to make sure he gets him, quote unquote. Is we know Herod's going to try to murder him, and we know he escapes, that God speaks to Joseph, his adopted father, in a dream for them to get out of town, right? So we know about this, but this is part of it that we typically skip over, except for the star, which we only treat very kind of glibly. We put this star on the top of our Christmas tree, or in the nativity plays, we put this big giant star up there. But this is really stunning. I mean, wise men from the east. So who are these guys? And we could spend hours and hours and hours talking about who these guys are, and we'll do that another time. But notice that they say, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" In other words, this is a very thinly veiled threat. They march right into Herod's court and they say, "Where is the legitimate king?" So with a nudge and a wink, they're saying, because we know you're not him. We know that you are a Roman appointee. You are not the true King of the Jews. Frankly, you're not the Davidic king of the Jews, is really what they're implying here. And then they make this really amazing and, like I said, bizarre statement. "We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." His star, what the heck is that? Are you trying to tell me, and we know this is true, but I'm reacting passionately here for a reason. Are you trying to tell me that they traveled from their capital, Ctesiphon, in the Parthian Empire, about 600 miles? It would have taken them a month to make this journey. That they traveled all this way because they saw a star in the night sky. They saw some type of celestial event, and that communicated to them, and they traveled all this way to find this new king. Well, apparently so. And then verse 3, which is one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible, and we blow right past it. It says, "When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him." Now that is stunning. Oh my word, that is stunning. Herod was a very savvy political operator. Normally this kind of thing he wouldn't have flinched. But we are told he was troubled, and not just Herod was troubled, but all Jerusalem with him. What would cause such a thing? And I'm actually going to have to answer that question in another episode, because I want to get into a particular component of the backstory here. And that backstory is the fact that you have actually had an ongoing relationship between the province of Babylon, which is now with a part of the Parthian Empire at this point in time. You have an ongoing relationship between the province of Babylon and Jerusalem in Judea. And to put this in perspective, you actually have to back up about 1,000 years before this time, before the birth of Christ. You actually have to back up about 1,000 years and get a running start in order to put this in perspective. So I'm going to spit out a lot of information really fast here, guys. So bear with me here as I set this up. But if you go back 1,000 years, that's when you have the United Kingdom of Israel. And this is their first king, Saul, David, and Solomon. And they have a very strong United Kingdom. But then when Solomon dies, his son, Rehoboam, fails miserably, and the result is the kingdom divides. So now you've got the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, right? So then, and like I said, I'm moving really quickly here. Then in the late 8th century BC, the Assyrian Empire comes in and conquers the northern kingdom. Then in the late 7th century, the Babylonian Empire not only conquers Assyria, but then conquers the southern kingdom of Judea. Now, the Babylonians, there's actually 3 separate sieges of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. And in the first one, they take about 10,000 captives. But this is actually really provocative because they take 10,000 of the best and the brightest Jews they can find. This is critical. They take nobility, they take royalty, they take the intelligentsia, they take the academics. That's who they take back to Babylon, because one of the things they're going to do is they are going to train them to operate in the Babylonian system. But not only does that happen, but the Jews themselves, when they get taken to Babylon, they immediately establish a Jewish infrastructure in Babylon. So about a dozen years later, when another siege of Jerusalem occurs and the temple gets destroyed, and now they take an enormous portion of the Jewish population captive back to Babylon, guess what has already happened? There is already Jewish infrastructure in Babylon. There's already schools, there's already synagogues, there's already kosher butchers. All of the essentials for maintaining a Jewish life are actually already exist in Babylon at that time. So this huge number of Jews are taken captive back to Babylon. And the point that I'm driving at here is that there is now a well-established Jewish community in Babylon from this point forward, and they maintain regular communication with the Jews that are back in the Promised Land, back in Canaan. Now, there's very few of them back in the Promised Land at this time. It's not 100% in Babylon and zero in Judea. There's still some left in Judea, but they are few and far between. Ready for this? The predominant Jewish community on the planet is now in Babylon. Okay, let me say that again for emphasis. The predominant Jewish community on the planet now lives in Babylon because the temple has been destroyed. The temple has been destroyed. So that means that temporarily the home of Jewish culture and religion is Babylon. It's not Jerusalem, it's Babylon. Okay, so now moving forward, in the mid-6th century BC, the Persian Empire conquers the Babylonian Empire. So what does this mean? This means they inherit all of the Jewish captives. They're now part of the Persian Empire, but then something very interesting happens. Cyrus the Great gives permission for the Jews to, quote unquote, return to the Promised Land, to go back to Jerusalem, to rebuild the city, and to theoretically rebuild the temple. All right. Now, it's estimated by this point in time that there are about 1 million Jews living in the Babylonian region of what is now the Persian Empire. And when Cyrus the Great grants them permission to go home, only about 42,000 go back. So now look at those numbers. 1 million Jews in the Persian Empire, but only roughly 40,000, 42,000 go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. That is a very, very, very small percentage. I mean, if you do the math really quick, if it's 1 million, then 10% is 100,000. So that means 1% is 10,000. So this is about 4%. This is a teeny little subsection of the Babylonian Jews that go back to Jerusalem. Okay, but now again, once again, a lot of information moving really, really fast here. You fast forward to about the mid to late 4th century BC. Now the Greek Empire conquers the Persian Empire. And then when Alexander the Great dies, his empire gets divided up amongst his 5 strongest generals. One of them gets defeated immediately. So in effect, it's really only his 4 strongest generals that divide up his kingdom. And the one that really truly matters for us today is his general named Seleucus, because Seleucus inherits all of the East. He inherits Judea and Syria and Mesopotamia, Babylon, and it even goes as far east as the Indus River in India. So it's this huge, enormous chunk of land is inherited by the general Seleucus, and then his descendants become the Greek dynasty that runs this part of the world, frankly, until 2 things happen, and this is what's important. This is why I'm bringing this up. Number one, this is such a huge area of land that a couple of different things start to happen right away. That, number one, the Seleucid Empire begins to weaken immediately because they just can't control this enormous portion of land, because the way they want to control it is because they want to make it all Greek. They want to have a uniform Greek culture in this entire area, and there's just not enough true-born Greeks migrating from Greece to come here and run it to make it this uniform culture. So what they need to do is they need to persuade the locals to adopt Jewish culture and then run it for them, and that doesn't really go so well. So, for example, it lasts about 100 years before it starts to start to break apart. But after about 100 years, in the far eastern portion of Seleucid's empire, there's a province called Parthia, and Parthia breaks away